You cut down my grandfather's tree? That oak was here a century before your clipboard ever showed up. That's what I said to her. Standing in the middle of my front lawn, staring at nothing but a ragged stump and fresh sawdust where my family's tree used to be. The chainsaws were already loaded up. The crew wouldn't look me in the eye. And Priscilla, oh, she smiled, said something about safety concerns and board approval. But she never got approval. She never even gave notice. My name is Caleb Morris. I'm a civil engineer. I don't rattle easily, but I do remember everything, especially when it comes to this land, my family's land. If you're watching this, let me know where you're tuning in from, drop it in the comments, and do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, by the time I'm done with this story, you're going to want a front row seat for what I did next. See, this wasn't just a tree, it was the tree, planted by my grandfather in 1924. The year he finished building this house, with his own 2 hands, hammer, saw, and spine that never bent. That tree was more than bark and branches. It was where he proposed to my grandmother, where my dad carved his initials the day he shipped out to Korea, where I sat with my daughter the day we scattered my wife's ashes in the creek behind the property. It was memory, and they shredded it like a weed. The HOA calls it beautification, I call it erasure. Priscilla Hawthorne, the president of the Greystone Bluffs HOA, has a face made for wine tastings and eviction notices. She walks around this place like she invented it, never mind the fact that I've been living here longer than she's been running her board. Her power doesn't come from votes or logic. It comes from fear that if you speak up, she'll make your life a procedural hell. Violation slips, bogus fines, contractor delays. You think it's just petty rules until it's your world they start peeling apart. For months before the tree, there were warning signs. Small, clever digs. A letter about my lawn being uneven. A violation for my truck being parked backward in my own driveway. I shrugged it off. I'm not the kind of guy who throws a fit over paperwork. But they weren't after order, they were after submission. And when they realized I wouldn't bend, they brought out the saws. That morning, I was driving back from a job site. I took a detour to grab my daughter's favorite cinnamon rolls. Thought I'd surprise her. We've been living here together since my wife passed. Just the 2 of us, figuring it out, trying to hold on to something solid. This house, this tree, it was our constant. And when I pulled up and saw that oak reduced to mulch, my hands shook. Not from shock, from clarity. Because I knew then this wasn't about safety. It was about leverage. It was about breaking people like me, folks who still remember what this place used to be, people who won't get bullied off their own front porch. I confronted Priscilla right there on the curb. She never flinched. It was a hazard, you should thank us. Funny, I told her, no one seemed concerned about it for the last 100 years. I wanted to scream. I didn't. I stood there, jaw tight, staring at the ghost of that tree. And right behind her I saw Eli Barrett, our HOA treasurer, just watching. He didn't say a word, didn't nod, just stood with his arms crossed, his lips pressed tight, his eyes flicking down at the stump like it was a crime scene he didn't sign up to witness. That was the first time I noticed it. His hands were trembling. The kind of tremble that comes not from age, but from conscience. That was when I decided this wouldn't be the end of the story. That stump wasn't a loss. It was a line, one they crossed. You don't tear up a man's roots and expect him to stay quiet. The sawdust was still fresh when the first new violation showed up, improper storage of yard debris. The debris, of course, being what was left of my tree. They'd destroyed it, and now they were fining me for the mess they made. You think that sounds like a bad joke. I did too. Until I saw the red tag slapped on my front door like a warning label. I didn't rip it down. I didn't even touch it. I left it there for documentation. That was the moment I shifted from disbelief to method. See, I grew up around problem solvers. My dad wasn't a man who whined. When something broke, he fixed it. When someone pushed, he leaned back harder. I don't yell, I don't threaten. I record, I build, and I plan. But back then, I didn't know how deep this game ran. That HOA wasn't just flexing muscle. It was testing the limits of what it could get away with, and with every petty slip, they were baiting me to snap, because that's how they win. You overreact, they justify more fines. You ignore them, they escalate. The next day it was a warning about unauthorized exterior fixtures. I had left my porch light on overnight. One of those old Edison bulbs I installed myself. The same light my wife always said made the house feel warm. Suddenly it was a nuisance to neighbors. Priscilla's doing, no doubt. And then they hit me for unapproved modifications to the front steps. The bricks were uneven, they said, unsafe. Those bricks have been there since the Kennedy administration. My daughter tripped on them once when she was 7, skinned her knee, and laughed it off. Now they're an issue? Please. But the worst part wasn't the notices, it was the eyes. Every morning, I saw a different neighbor walking slower past my house. Not friendly, not curious, appraising, like they were measuring something, like I was being watched, catalogued. And every afternoon, a silver SUV with no visible plates would roll down the block, pause near my driveway, and keep going. Always the same time, always the same car, surveillance disguised as routine. They weren't just trying to find me, they were trying to pressure me out. The HOA was tightening the noose with bureaucracy. Death by 1,000 checkboxes. But I wasn't about to be scared off my own land. Not this time. Not after what they did to that tree. That tree wasn't just symbolic, it was precedent. If they could take that without permission, they could take anything. I started keeping a log, handwritten in a black leather notebook I found in my garage, the same one my father used to track home repairs back when people fixed things instead of replacing them. I noted the time each violation appeared, took photos of every letter. I even kept the envelopes. Patterns were forming. And through it all, Eli Barrett remained silent. I'd see him at the mailbox, sorting through his letters with trembling fingers. We'd nod, maybe trade a word or two, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He always looked over his shoulder when he spoke, like the air itself had ears. Once he dropped an envelope, city council letterhead, and picked it up so fast you'd think it was radioactive. That told me everything. He knew. He wasn't ready to say it, but he knew. I figured if they were watching me, I'd give them something to see. I began repainting my fence. Same color, same brush, but a different movement each day. Some days I'd only do one board. Others I'd move slow on purpose. Let them log it. Let them file another report. It wasn't about the paint, it was about control. Letting them think I was just another homeowner fussing over chores while I collected evidence. They were playing checkers, I was drawing up blueprints. The real blow came when I got the certified letter. Registered mail, big red stamp on the front, final warning before legal enforcement. They were claiming continued non-compliance and threatening to escalate to a lien on my property. For bricks. For a porch light. For sawdust. I sat down that night with Jenna, my daughter, and showed her the letter. She looked at me with more concern than fear. She's sharp, observant. They want us out, don't they? I nodded, but they picked the wrong family. You know they can't do that, right? Jenna asked, flipping through the HOA bylaws on her laptop. They have to give formal notice and get approval from the city arborist. This wasn't just shady, it was illegal. I nodded, but didn't respond right away. I was watching the sunlight spill through the kitchen window, right through the empty space where the tree used to cast its shade. The light looked wrong now. Hollow, too bright, like it was exposing something I wasn't ready to see. That night, I took my old boots and walked out to the stump. The ground was still raw, torn open like a wound. I ran my fingers over the rings, clean cut, precise, like they didn't hesitate. The smell of sap and sawdust had already faded, but I could still hear the hum of the chainsaws in the back of my head. I knelt and placed my hand flat on the center of the stump, like I was checking for a pulse. I remembered the photo of me as a boy, sitting under those branches with my dad on his return from deployment. He'd carved a little compass into the bark, said it would always point home. Now there was nothing to point to. The next morning, I made a stop at city records. I needed to confirm it for myself. No permit was filed, no inspection reports, just a single complaint marked urgent. The signature, Priscilla Hawthorne. Want a copy? The clerk asked, clearly used to frustrated homeowners. I nodded. 2, one for me, one for my lawyer. That was a bluff. I didn't have a lawyer, but the words felt good in my mouth. Strong. Like I wasn't standing still anymore. When I got home, there was a folded flyer stuck in my mailbox. HOA meeting special session. Location, Community Hall. Topic, land use and neighborhood uniformity. I didn't even make it to the porch before Eli Barrett called out from across the street. You planning on showing up? I turned. He was watering his lawn with a frayed green hose, but the way he gripped it told me he wasn't focused on grass. I don't miss meetings when they're about me. Eli gave a tight nod. Might be more fireworks than usual. Then I'll bring a match, I said, and walked inside. That night at the meeting, the air in the community hall was stale and thick. Neighbors sat in rows, flipping through stapled packets they barely read. The board sat at the long table up front, smug and rehearsed. Priscilla, in her red blazer and pearl earrings, looked like she was hosting a brunch, not a battle. We've received multiple concerns, she began, voice smooth as varnish, about homes that are not meeting the aesthetic standards of Greystone Bluffs. It's important we maintain harmony. Some elements, like old fixtures, outdated fencing, or dead trees, create visual dissonance. That word, dissonance, hit me sideways. I stood. Funny how fast we went from safety hazard to visual dissonance. Which one was it, Priscilla? A few heads turned, eyes widened. She didn't blink. I understand this is personal for you, Mr. Morris, but this board follows process. Process? I held up the permit records. You filed this complaint yourself. No permit, no city order, no arborist report, just your signature and a phone call. A few whispers broke out in the back. Priscilla's smile tightened. Let's not get emotional. I'm not emotional, I said. I'm documented. For a split second she hesitated, not long, but long enough, and in that flicker I saw her look sideways at Eli. That's when it happened. Eli's hand, resting on the table, curled into a fist. His jaw clenched. The tremble was back. His voice didn't rise, didn't waver, but it cut through the room like a sharp wind. I told her not to touch the tree, he said. Silence. Everyone turned. Priscilla's head snapped toward him. Eli, he didn't look at her. He looked at me. I told her it was protected, that it had historical value, but she said it was time to modernize, that old things get in the way. The room shifted, like the floor tilted a few degrees. I stared at him. No victory, no vindication, just a cold knot in my chest. He had known. He'd stood by, watched, but he spoke, and that mattered. After the meeting, he walked past me toward the parking lot. I didn't stop him. He didn't apologize. But as he passed, he said, barely above a whisper, I owe your father more than silence. Just be careful, Caleb. They're not done. If you've ever had to fight for something that mattered, something tied to your roots, your family, your peace, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. You're not alone. And trust me, this fight, it's just getting started. After Eli's quiet confession in the parking lot, I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the back porch with a legal pad, jotting down everything I remembered. Dates, phrases, looks exchanged, the names of the board members who avoided eye contact when I spoke. When dawn hit, the page was nearly full. I wasn't writing for therapy. I was building a case. It was clear now. The tree was never the end goal. It was the first move. By the next morning, the HOA had already adjusted its tactics. No more red tag notices. They'd switched to subtler weapons. Email, reminders, vague policy references, and thinly veiled warnings about repeat infractions. The language changed from legalese to polite threats, but the message stayed the same. Back down or be buried in paper. I wasn't backing down. I just needed the right ammunition. That's when I remembered the old cabinet in the garage, my father's archive. When he passed, I boxed everything without sorting, receipts, letters, blueprints, photos, and somewhere in there, his HOA documents from the early days, back when the board was just a group of neighbors trying to keep the place from falling apart. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out there. The garage smelled like dust and oil. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the concrete floor. I pulled on a pair of gloves and started digging. The metal cabinet creaked as I opened it, one of those deep, vertical drawers packed tight with file folders, wrapped in twine. At first it was just receipts, rusty nails, lumber lists, water heater manuals, then deeper in, meeting agendas, printed newsletters from the early 2000s, and finally near the bottom a thick brown envelope labeled in my father's careful handwriting, HOA, Charter and Bylaws, personal copy. I opened it slowly. Inside was gold. Original copies of the HOA charter, highlighted notes, handwritten amendments on yellow legal paper, and stapled to the back a single-page deed restriction, dated 2 years before the HOA ever formed, showing that our property was never included in the original boundaries. It was grandfathered in, literally. I let out a slow breath. "They've got no jurisdiction," I whispered. Suddenly a noise behind me. The flashlight flickered. I froze. It was just Jenna, barefoot, hoodie draped over her shoulders. "You okay?" I handed her the document. "I think your grandfather just saved us." She read it twice, then sat down beside me on the floor. "So, if we were never technically part of the HOA, then their rules are voluntary at best and illegal at worst." Her eyes lit up. "We could sue." I nodded, but my brain was already turning faster than that. "Not yet. First we build the trap." I scanned the rest of the file. My dad had scribbled notes in the margins, names of past board members, side notes about budgets, even one meeting where Priscilla, back then just a committee volunteer, pushed for expanded oversight to include more homes without a vote. There it was in writing. My father had circled her name, underlined it twice. Back inside, I scanned everything, uploaded it to a secure cloud folder and a backup USB. I wasn't about to let physical evidence be the only line of defense. We needed redundancy, protection, and proof. Later that afternoon, I took a walk around the neighborhood, not to stir trouble, but to observe. Something had shifted. Neighbors who used to wave gave nervous nods instead. One woman crossed the street when she saw me coming. Another stood at her window, blinds twitching as I passed. Fear, but not of me. Fear of what I represented, someone who didn't roll over. I turned the corner and found Eli in his driveway, struggling to load a busted lawnmower into the back of his truck. I didn't offer help. I just stood there. "You knew about the deed?" He didn't answer right away, just adjusted the straps on the mower. "I figured if I spoke up sooner," he said quietly, "they'd shut me out, strip me from the board. But I didn't think she'd go after your tree." I stepped closer. "They're going after everything now." He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "She wants to sell. That's the endgame. Flatten the older homes, bring in developers. Clean slate. You're in the way." I clenched my jaw. "Then I'll be the last one standing." I didn't waste time after talking to Eli. I called in sick the next morning, not because I was tired, but because I needed daylight. Not for yard work, not for protest, for clarity. I had to know how far this thing stretched. And if Eli was right, if Priscilla wanted to pave over Greystone Bluffs and bring in developers, then somewhere, somehow, there'd be a paper trail. People like her don't operate on faith. They work through forms, signatures, amendments. Hidden in plain sight, probably buried in that cursed community center where every HOA meeting smelled like reheated coffee and passive aggression. So I went. I knew the janitor, Mr. Albee, retired Navy, walked with a limp, didn't say much. But he'd been around longer than most homes here. I caught him unlocking the rear storage wing, juggling keys like an old habit. "You don't have to let me in," I said, "but I need 5 minutes. I'm not here to steal or break anything. I'm here because something's not right." He looked at me long enough to make me squirm. Finally he nodded. "5th door on the left. Just don't touch the flags. They still matter to me." Inside, the hallway buzzed with fluorescent lights and that faint metallic smell of old carpet cleaner. The door creaked when I pushed it open. A storage room. No cameras. Just rows of file cabinets and stacked cardboard boxes, most labeled by year. I started with the boxes. Some were junk, meeting decorations, community event banners, faded Polaroids from holiday potlucks. But then I found a beige folder with a strip of masking tape across the front, scrawled in Sharpie, Subdivision Expansion, Phase 3. No date, no seal, just that heading. I opened it. Inside were several property maps with lots marked in red, Handwritten notes. Priscilla's handwriting. I recognized the sharp cursive. One memo read, "Properties to target. Board action needed before May." And right there, underlined twice, was my address. Along with 5 others on my block. The oldest homes, the ones that didn't fit her vision. Another note, begin non-compliance proceedings to increase pressure. Focus on exterior issues. Exterior issues, like lights, steps, trees. My fists clenched around the folder, and for a second I almost walked out with it, but that's not how you win. You don't steal the match. You strike it at the right time. I used my phone to take photos of every document, every page, every map, then carefully returned the folder to where I found it. As I turned to leave, something else caught my eye, an older binder, half buried under a rolled-up banner. HOA Financials 201620222. I flipped it open and skimmed the ledger columns. Vendor names, contractor payouts, donations logged under ambiguous labels like Beautification Project and Enhancement Initiative. Then I saw it. A recurring payment to a company called Strathmore Development Partners. Monthly transfers, listed as consulting retainer. Tens of thousands of dollars, not a peep mentioned in any community meeting. No votes, no transparency. I've snapped more photos. My pulse was up, not from fear, from focus. I wasn't just a homeowner now. I was standing in the middle of the house of cards, and I could see every cracked foundation. On the way out, Albie gave me a once-over. "You find what you were looking for?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, "but I know where to start." Back at home, Jenna was waiting on the porch, legs tucked up in the chair like she used to sit as a kid. "You look like you just walked out of a spy movie." I handed her the phone, more like a slow-motion heist. "We've got receipts." She flipped through the photos, her eyes widening. "They planned it. Everything, the tree, the violations, all of it." I nodded. "And they've been funneling HOA funds to a development firm, probably setting up a sale behind closed doors." Jenna leaned forward, serious now. "So what do? We don't take it to court yet, we take it to the neighbors. Quietly. We show them the plan, what she's trying to build on top of what she wants to tear down. Then, I said, we hit her where it hurts. Legitimacy. We dismantle her from the inside." We didn't go public yet. That would have been a mistake. A loud accusation without proof just gives the enemy time to bury it. What we needed was momentum. Quiet and deliberate. Just like they'd built their scheme. The next morning, I walked into the garage with one goal: find the compass. Not the metaphor, the real one. That carved compass on the old oak, my dad's mark, had splintered when they took the tree down, but I'd kept the piece. That chunk of bark with the carving was sitting somewhere in the chaos of boxes and shelves. I needed it now, not for revenge, but for focus. Something to remind me why this fight mattered. It took me an hour, digging through weathered boxes and rusted nails until I finally found it, tucked in a crate beneath my dad's tool belt and a folded American flag. The bark had dried and cracked, but the lines of the compass were still clear. Simple. Centered. I held it in my palm like a map with no destination, and I remembered his voice saying, "No matter how far you go, you know where you came from." But that tree wasn't just wood. It was home. And Priscilla had severed that on purpose. By evening, I had scanned every page of the development file and cross-referenced the payments to Strathmore Development Partners. Jenna helped build a spreadsheet of every dollar, every date, matched to HOA board meeting notes, where none of it was ever mentioned. Not once. "This one's the most damning," Jenna said, pointing to an invoice marked Landscape Enhancement that corresponded to the exact week they cut down our tree. They used community money to remove it, not because it was dangerous, because it was in their way. I nodded, jaw tight. We're going to show them what real community looks like. Our first step wasn't confrontation, it was education. We made copies of the key documents, maps, financial records, and the memo with my address underlined, and slid them into plain envelopes. No signatures, no threats, just one message written on the front: "You deserve to know." We delivered them by hand, after sunset, house by house, only to neighbors we trusted, or at least those who looked tired of nodding through Priscilla's nonsense. At one house, A widow named Mrs. Greaves opened the door in her robe and slippers. She took the envelope like it weighed 100 pounds. "I always wondered why my gardening permit got denied," she whispered. At another house, a father of 3 read through the packet and muttered, and here I was, thinking I was the only one getting harassed. Each conversation was brief, no pitches, no pressure, just facts. It was the beginning of something slower, heavier than outrage, doubt, the kind that spreads. By the end of the week, I had 2 more unexpected allies. One former board member who resigned last year under personal reasons, and another neighbor who worked for a title company and agreed to pull archived documents on past HOA property lines. Eli was the last piece. I found him trimming his hedges again, same stoic silence, same haunted look. "I know she's cornered," I said, "but she still thinks she's in control." He didn't stop working, just spoke softly. "That woman built her identity on control. Strip that away and all that's left is the panic. You ready to help me show the neighborhood who she really is?" Eli set down the shears. "I'll do more than that." He went inside and returned with a weathered manila envelope, his own stash of board meeting notes, minutes that never made it into the official records, scribbled comments, margins full of observations. There it was again. Strathmore, meeting dates that never matched the agendas sent to the public. He handed it to me without fanfare. "She thinks I've been asleep," he said. "Truth is, I've just been waiting for someone to fight back." That night, Jenna and I sat in the living room, surrounded by papers, photos, and strategy maps like we were running a war room. We were. But it didn't feel hopeless. It felt controlled. "We hit them next week," I said, "publicly." Jenna smiled. "Let's knock down the whole rotten tree." I glanced at the chunk of bark sitting on the mantel, my father's compass, still pointing home. You ever had to protect something that carried your family's legacy, something they tried to erase like it was just in the way? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. This fight isn't just about trees or houses, it's about standing your ground when no one else will. We chose Saturday morning on purpose. Same time Priscilla hosted her HOA walkthroughs, those strolls where she pointed out faded shutters and slightly overgrown flower beds like she was surveying royal grounds. But this time we walked first. Jenna printed out clean, concise summaries of the development plan and financial discrepancies. Eli helped us label them. The 3 of us moved house to house with quiet confidence. No knocking, just folders slipped under doors, marked with one simple line. "You've been lied to, here's the proof." We weren't loud, we were surgical. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing, not with rage, with curiosity. Lawns were half mowed, barbecues abandoned mid-prep. People stood in driveways, reading, comparing notes. You could see the questions forming on their faces. Why was my violation from last month so aggressive? Why were only older houses being targeted? Why is there a developer's name on our HOA books? We didn't tell them what to think. We just gave them a flashlight and showed them where to aim it. That afternoon, Jenna and I met with Leah Carter, the local real estate agent I trusted. She wasn't just in the business, she grew up in the Bluffs before it got gentrified into submission. If anyone could make sense of how the development deals were being structured, it was her. I slid the Strathmore documents across her desk. She raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you get these?" "Call it community housekeeping." She read in silence. Then she exhaled, slow and sharp. "This isn't just sketchy. This is bait and snup territory. If she's trying to force certain homeowners out and flip the lots to Strathmore, that's textbook bad faith. Can it be stopped?" Leah leaned back. "If you prove intent, absolutely, but you'll need more than paper. You'll need people." "Working on that," I said. When we got home, Jenna was already flipping through Eli's envelope again. She paused on one page, a crumpled piece of meeting minutes with a handwritten side note. She tapped it. "What's this name?" "K. Underwood, Code Compliance?" I peered closer. "That's not a board member." Eli, who had just walked in, heard us. Underwood was a compliance officer Priscilla hired off the books. She used him to issue informal citations, scare tactics, never officially on the payroll. Jenna's eyes lit up. "That's illegal, right?" "Only if we can prove he acted under her direction," I said. But something clicked. A few months back, I'd seen a guy snapping photos of my truck. Not HOA staff. No uniform. Just clipboard and camera. I didn't think much of it until now. "Can we find him?" Jenna asked. "I think I already did," I said, pulling out my phone. I searched my email for the old security footage I'd saved from our driveway camera. It took a minute, but there it was. Time-topped video of the man walking past our house, taking photos, then leaving in a beat-up sedan with no plate on the front. We paused the clip. Jenna zoomed in. The logo on the clipboard, Underwood Property Enforcement. Cheap, unofficial, and very real. "Bet him," she grinned. We printed the image and added it to the folder. The trap was finally forming. By evening, we had everything organized in 3 binders. One for evidence, one for legal reference, and one for visuals. Jenna color-coded tabs, Eli added annotations, and I made a phone call. To Judge Ramirez's clerk. Not for a lawsuit, not yet, but to request a public mediation hearing under city ordinance for disputed HOA activity. It was a long shot, but it was real, and it forced them into the open. "Priscilla won't see this coming," Jenna said. "She won't see anything," I replied. "She's been too busy looking down on everyone." We sat on the porch that night, just watching the street. No big declarations, no cheering, just lights on in more houses than usual, conversations behind closed doors, a shift in the air. The kind that happens right before something breaks. The letter came 2 days later, gold-trimmed envelope, wax seal with the Greystone Bluffs insignia. Priscilla's handwriting on the front like she thought it still carried weight. Inside, formal notification of a special emergency board session to address escalating homeowner disruptions and misinformation. Translation: she was rattled. She'd seen the binders, she'd heard the whispers, she knew the street was shifting. What she didn't know was how deep we were prepared to go. I stood at the kitchen counter with the letter in one hand and a pen in the other. I flipped it over and wrote one word on the back: accepted. Then I handed it to Eli. He smirked. "Deliver by hand?" "Absolutely." We weren't hiding anymore. The goal now wasn't just exposure, it was pressure. While Eli made the delivery, Jenna and I printed out the HOA Charter's clause about leadership recall. Paragraph 12B, in the event of unethical conduct or misuse of HOA funds, a board can be temporarily suspended pending mediation. It had been there all along, buried under bureaucracy and bad faith. Most people never read past the landscaping rules. I stapled the clause to a sheet of timeline evidence. Every suspicious invoice, every off-the-books payment, a flowchart, clean and damning. At the emergency session, the room was packed. Folding chairs filled every inch. Neighbors we hadn't seen in months showed up. Even Mr. Albee from the community center leaned against the back wall, arms crossed like he was guarding something sacred. Priscilla entered fashionably late, as always, wearing a gray pantsuit and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The rest of the board shuffled behind her, visibly uneasy. Only one seat remained empty next to the microphone. I stood and walked to it. Before she could speak, I laid the binder on the table and opened to the first page. The projector behind me lit up as Jenna synced the presentation. Page 1, the deed map showing our home outside the HOA's original boundaries. Gasps. Page 2, financial records with red-flagged payments to Strathmore. Murmurs, shifting in seats. Page 3, the footage of the unlicensed compliance officer photographing my property, logo visible. And then came the audio. Eli had recorded a conversation from a board meeting 3 months back. His voice asking, "Do we have legal clearance to proceed with tree removals?" And Priscilla's response, clear and flippant, "They don't check, they just complain after." The room was silent. Until Mrs. Greaves stood up and said, "I filed a complaint about my fence last year. They told me it violated code, but there's nothing in the bylaws about paint color." Others followed. A couple down the row revealed their patio extension denial despite identical ones approved a street over. Another man admitted he was threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fees he never received notice for. The tipping point wasn't rage. It was recognition. The realization that none of them were alone, that this wasn't about rules, it was about control. Priscilla tried to regain footing. "This is a coordinated smear campaign," she said, voice sharp and brittle. "These documents are unverified and likely fabricated." I tapped the binder. Every page is time-stamped, cross-referenced, and pulled from your own storage room. I invite anyone here to examine them themselves. Jenna handed out paper copies. We made sure every row had one. Then I held up the charter. Under Article 12B, this board can be suspended pending formal mediation. And we are requesting that mediation. Silence again, until Eli stood. As treasurer, I support this motion, and I believe an internal audit is long overdue. Someone clapped. Then another. Soon, the entire room stood, not for me, not for drama, but for accountability. Priscilla's eyes darted, no allies, no lifeline. She didn't storm out. She just sat back in her chair, small and still, like a statue in a room that no longer needed her. That night, back at home, we lit a fire in the backyard. Nothing big, just enough to stay warm while Jenna toasted marshmallows and I stared at the compass bark on the mantel inside. We hadn't won, not yet. But for the first time in months, the street felt ours again. The next morning, the neighborhood didn't feel tense. It felt awake. Porch lights stayed on longer than usual. Dogs barked, kids played without being hushed, and for once, people were talking loud enough to be overheard. Conversations that used to stay behind hedges now spilled onto sidewalks and porches. They weren't whispers anymore, they were questions. Real ones. By noon, someone had started a petition. Not a digital one, handwritten, passed around like a casserole dish at a potluck. People were knocking on doors, not out of fear, but curiosity. A woman at the corner told me her violation notice had a photo of the wrong house. A man 3 doors down pulled out a $400 0-cents assessment he'd paid even though he never got a prior warning. Nobody seemed surprised anymore, just tired and ready. We hadn't organized it. We didn't push for it. The street moved on its own. That's when I knew this had grown past me. It wasn't about one tree or one fine. It was a collective remembering. Everyone had a scar they'd dismissed, and now they were comparing them out loud. Of course, retaliation came quick. 2 days after the emergency board session, I received a formal letter, wax seal, city insignia, and a complaint filed under my name. Priscilla accused me of defamation and coercion of a board member. Her attempt to flip the narrative was both expected and weak. Jenna read the letter, tossed it on the table, and asked flatly, "So now you're the villain?" I shrugged. That means we're getting close. Still, this wasn't the endgame. It wasn't enough to expose her. We had to close every door behind her so she couldn't crawl back through. I met with Leah again that afternoon. This time, Eli came too. Her office was quiet, blinds half drawn, the table covered in title records, HOA financials, and the now infamous Strathmore files. Leah slid a folder across the table. 2 of the 5 properties Priscilla targeted were never approved for transfer. One of them has a forged signature. She's already in talks with an out-of-state contractor. These deals are illegal. Eli leaned back in his chair, quiet, jaw clenched. She wasn't just trying to pressure us. She was trying to sell the block out from under us. I nodded. She wanted a clean exit. But now, we make sure she answers for it. That night, Jenna pinned a notice to the neighborhood bulletin board. No drama, no finger-pointing. Just 3 short questions for the residents to consider. Have you ever received a fine you couldn't explain? Have you ever seen someone taking pictures of your property without a badge? Have you ever had a permit denied for reasons that felt off? At the bottom, in simple black ink, it read, "Join us this Sunday for a town walk. No signs, no shouting, just neighbors walking together, that's all." Sunday came, and the walk began. At first, it was just us, me, Jenna, Ellie, and Leah, 4 people walking slowly from one end of Greystone Bluffs to the other, past every curb, mailbox, and clipped hedge that had once been weaponized into a violation. Then the Bakers joined. The Mendozas, a college kid who never waved at anyone but rode alongside us on his bike, a single dad with his stroller, and before we reached the roundabout there were over 30 of us, side by side, quiet and unshakable. Priscilla stood on her porch, arms crossed, unmoved. She wanted noise, she wanted chaos. That's what gave her power, people flailing, giving her the excuse to call order. But this wasn't chaos, it was calm, intentional. And it rattled her more than shouting ever could. That evening, just as the sun dipped low over the bluffs, we got the email from the city. A mediation hearing was scheduled, public, formal, on record, all board members required to attend. The city clerk's signature was stamped at the bottom. I forwarded it to Priscilla. She didn't respond. But Eli told me later she'd tried to call a closed executive session with the board, and no one showed up. Power hadn't vanished, it had just moved, and it wasn't in the boardroom anymore. It was in every footstep that echoed down that street. Later that night, I stood by the stump again, not angry, just grounded. The moss had spread along the edges. I didn't see a loss anymore. I saw a beginning. Jenna joined me. You ready for the hearing? I looked out across the street, where porch lights still glowed and voices still carried. She wanted a blank slate, I said. She's about to get it. If you've ever stood your ground when the odds were stacked against you, if you've ever watched a quiet street rise up with purpose, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. This isn't just a story about a neighborhood. It's about knowing when to walk together and never look back. The Monday before the hearing, the neighborhood held its breath, but this time not out of fear. It was something else now, anticipation. Not the panicked kind that curls in your stomach, the kind that sharpens your spine. The porch lights stayed on longer again. People watered their lawns a little slower. No one said it, but we were all waiting for the same thing, for the last crack in the wall to give way. That crack came around noon. Jenna walked into the kitchen holding a small white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single flash drive and a typed note. You didn't get this from me, but it's everything. Play track 5. We plugged it into the laptop. Track 5 was a recording. Audio only. No context, no names, just voices, but we recognized them immediately. It was a conversation between Priscilla and someone else, likely a representative from Strathmore. You'll get the first round of contracts before the next board vote, the man said. Priscilla answered smoothly, the homeowners won't know until it's too late. I've got 3 more to pressure out, and Morris is the last real holdout. That was all we needed. Jenna looked up from the screen, eyes wide. Who sent this? No idea, I said, but someone on the insides finally had enough. Eli didn't admit to it when I asked, just said, people reach a limit, sounds like someone else did too. With that final piece, we had our cornerstone. We met Leah that evening at the local print shop, neutral territory, away from community eyes. She helped us assemble a simple packet, timeline, documents, maps, audio transcript, and a final page quoting the HOA charter clause about emergency dissolution. We printed 25 copies, one for each attendee registered for the hearing. Jenna added a short opening statement signed by me. This isn't about revenge. This is about restoring trust. Tuesday night, I stepped outside and took a long look at the block. Every window held a little glow. Some had a candle, some had porch lights turned red, the community's quiet signal of unity. We didn't ask for that. Someone just started it, and the others followed. I picked up the old piece of bark, my father's compass, and placed it in my coat pocket. Not for drama, for grounding. The hearing was held at City Hall. Neutral ground, public seating. A mediator, not a judge, but the formality felt real, weighted. Priscilla arrived 15 minutes late. No pearls this time, no blazer, just black slacks and a look that said she already knew she was finished. I didn't smile, I didn't nod. Let her feel what silence feels like when you've spent years talking over everyone else. The hearing began with procedural language, terms, conditions, acknowledgement of notice, then came the open statement period. I kept mine short. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician, I'm a homeowner. My family's been on that land for 3 generations. This board, under current leadership, has not just overstepped. They've deliberately manipulated rules, redirected funds, and attempted to erase legal boundaries for personal gain. We have documentation, and now we have voices. Real ones. Then I played the audio. Even the mediator sat up straighter. Priscilla didn't speak. Her attorney asked for an immediate recess. Denied. One by one, neighbors stood up, not to rant, but to confirm. A denied permit, a mysterious violation, a threat of lien, a tree cut without warning. The room didn't explode. It unfolded. Layer by layer, story by story, everything she'd built came loose. When it ended, the mediator called for a vote to temporarily suspend the board pending investigation. Unanimous. Priscilla sat, stone-faced, blinking like the light in the room was too sharp. Her attorney leaned in, whispering something urgent. She shook her head. Then she stood, straightened her papers, and walked out without a word. As she passed me, I said nothing, because the street had already spoken. Priscilla didn't return to the Bluffs after the hearing. Her car didn't show up in her driveway, her porch lights stayed off, and the HOA email account she once used, like a sword, bounced every message back with a simple auto-reply. Inactive. The silence left behind wasn't peaceful, not yet. It was hollow, like a stage after the curtain dropped, but it gave the neighborhood room to breathe. That weekend, I was outside repainting my fence. Not because of a violation, but because it finally felt like mine again. No clipboard, no SUV circling, just me, a brush, and the slow rhythm of reclaiming space. Eli walked over with 2 coffees. No small talk, just handed me one and nodded toward the old HOA sign at the subdivision entrance. "She's not the only one stepping down," he said. 2 others resigned this morning. Any reason given? He smiled faintly. Personal burnout. But I think we both know what that means. I didn't gloat. There was nothing to celebrate about a system collapsing, especially one that was supposed to serve. But there was a difference between collapse and clearing, and what we had now was a clearing. That afternoon, the city posted the official notice. A temporary management trustee would oversee Greystone Bluffs until the residents could vote on a new board. And until then, all fines and enforcement actions were suspended. Jenna printed it out and taped a copy to our fridge. "Proof," she said. "The kind you can touch." Later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address again. Inside was a photocopy of the development contract Priscilla had nearly finalized. But this version had handwritten notes in the margins, red ink, circles around dollar amounts, phrases like "no transparency," targeted removals, and one that hit me hardest: "This isn't what we signed up for." Whoever sent it wasn't just backing us, they were defecting. That evening, I hosted something my father would have approved of, an open porch night. Nothing formal, just folding chairs, iced tea, a few porch lights strung from one roof to the next. People came. They brought stories, not complaints. Laughter, not rumors. For the first time in years, the Bluffs sounded like a neighborhood again. You could hear kids laughing past dusk. You could hear neighbors remembering the names of people 2 houses down. Leah stopped by, sat on the steps beside me, and said, "You know, most people wouldn't have fought. Most just sell, move, and grumble from a distance." I nodded. I didn't have the luxury of leaving. My roots are here. She looked toward the backyard where the stump still sat, now ringed with stones and small flowers Jenna had planted. Funny how something dead can become a landmark. I thought about that long after the crowd went home. That night, as the porch emptied and the street dimmed, I stood alone beside the compass bark sitting on the mantel. I hadn't touched it since the hearing. It felt heavier now, like it had absorbed everything we'd lived through. I held it in my hand, then walked outside and placed it gently on the stump. Not buried, not burned, just placed. No plaque, no speech, just memory. And that's when I realized this whole thing had never really been about beating the HOA. It wasn't about policies or bylaws or violations. It was about keeping what matters from being rewritten. They cut down the tree. They tried to erase what it stood for, but all they did was make the roots more visible. And now those roots ran through the whole street. The reckoning had come, not with torches or outrage, but with order, patience, and proof. Priscilla had wielded control like a gavel, but in the end we answered with something louder, truth backed by unity. And in the end, it was the quiet that won. Spring came early that year. The air smelled different, less like caution tape and cold concrete, and more like something settling in, like the dust finally decided it had nowhere left to float. We had a new temporary HOA manager, sent in by the city. A quiet guy named Rylan with a clipboard that actually stayed in the truck unless needed. He walked the streets like a guest, not a king. The old board had dissolved quietly. No press release, no farewell emails, just a blank spot on the community website where Priscilla's bio used to sit. Eli told me she tried to sell her house and relocate out of state, but she'd miscalculated something important. See that land deal she'd brokered, the one she thought would net her a private payout? It was legally tied to Greystone's HOA charter, and now that charter was frozen under audit. No legal board, no approved sale, the developers pulled out, the escrow failed, the contracts collapsed. And a cherry on top? Her home sat on one of the few parcels the HOA technically owned, as communal land, under her own bylaw revisions. She thought it was a loophole she could exploit. Turns out, it made her liable for back taxes and improper personal use of association property. The city ruled her lot needed to be reassessed, and you guessed it, her new monthly dues tripled. People talk about karma like it's some abstract force. Sometimes it arrives in a certified envelope. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. The street spoke louder than any victory speech. The garden Jenna planted around the old stump was blooming now. Purple asters, creeping thyme, and a little brass sign someone anonymously added. It didn't say anything dramatic, just the word, rooted. That Saturday we hosted a block potluck, real one this time. Tables lined the street, kids ran without being shushed, Leah brought homemade lemonade, Eli grilled ribs like it was the 4th of July. People talked, not about rules, not about fines, about music, travel, dogs, the way it used to be. Someone asked me if I'd consider running for the new HOA board when the time came. I laughed. Only if they tripled the salary. There's no salary, they said. Exactly. I walked inside just before sundown, back aching from folding chairs and long conversations. On my way in, I saw it again, that compass bark, still resting on the stump like a page from a storybook no one ever finished. I knelt next to it, brushed a bit of soil off the edge, and smiled. Funny. They thought they erased history when they cut it down. All they did was make space for it to grow wider. This fight wasn't about power. It was about place. About remembering that some roots are deeper than paperwork, louder than policy. They stretch through memories, traditions, stubborn mornings, and coffee-stained notebooks. They live in old bricks and crooked fences and the light from a porch bulb that's been burning since '97. I didn't win because I yelled louder. I won because I stayed, because I remembered what they tried to forget. So if you're watching this and you're in the middle of something, if they're telling you to sit down, shut up, or just go with it, I hope you remember this. You don't have to scream to stand your ground. You don't have to fight dirty to win clean. You just have to know where your roots are and guard them. 'Cause once they're gone, you don't get them back. Tell me, have you ever had to stand up for your land, your family, or your legacy? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. This isn't just my story. It's ours. And I'm listening.